Hello, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Aurat Card. Today we're going to do something very different in Aurat Card. We're going to talk in English. Usually we conduct our shows in Urdu, which is our national language, but today we're going to talk in English because we think that the subject we're going to talk about needs to be addressed in English. So you do know that there's a war raging on in the Middle East, and Israel has declared war on Palestine. Gaza Strip is being bombed. This is after Saturday's attack by Hamas on Israeli people and Israeli targets. And then there is another war going on, which perhaps you might not have realized, or you probably have by now. And that is the war that Western media has unleashed on truth. And Western media is on a mission to obfuscate and, in fact, ignore the truth completely, so that what is coming, which we know what is coming, that Israel is going to annihilate Gaza, and so that you do not find out too many details about that, or you do not feel too sorry for the people there who are dying in droves and who are going through what is essentially genocide. So they do not want you to feel too bad about them. That is why what they have done is that they keep on obfuscating the truth, or they keep on making up new stories. They keep on making up facts which are not real. One of the biggest, we'll talk about the numbers and what's happening in Gaza and Israel later on. But what I wanted to start off with one example is an organization that used to be very venerable for us. It was a very prestigious place, and we thought, oh, this is one of those organizations that speaks truth to power, and that was the BBC. We were very sadly mistaken. It is astounding how BBC is helping Israel manufacture this whole narrative. And this narrative, this dehumanizing of Palestinians. Let me give you an example. So one of the examples I want to quote here is BBC's Tony Livesey. He's talking to this girl in Gaza, this teenage girl. Her name is Salma, and he's talking to her, and she tells him, there's a video, you can see it. I will try to put up clips from that video. And she tells him what life is like for her. And she says, if you look back at your younger age, were you living this life? And she tells him all these horrifying facts, which are the reality of life living under Israeli occupation. And when she said all of that, and he says to her, oh, well, what about this survey that shows that Hamas is very popular in Palestine? And she just, she's so flabbergasted by that. She says, I'm sorry, you have called the wrong person. I thought you wanted to ask me what life is like in Gaza, but what you're actually asking me about is some survey. And I'm living in fear for my parents' life, and you're asking me about surveys. And it shows, and he actually had nothing more to say to that. He quickly finished the call. And then on BBC Newsnight, the head of the Palestinian mission in the UK, Hussam Zumlot. So Mr. Hussam appeared on the show. He'd already appeared on 3 channels where everybody had started off by asking him, do you condemn what Hamas has done? He handled it really well. But when he appeared on Newsnight on BBC, he started off by saying that his cousin had been killed in Gaza along with her children. And he said, my cousin is not Hamas. Her children are not Hamas. And the host shows no empathy. She just says, oh, sorry to hear that, but about Hamas, and she just moves on. And okay, so if you do not have any empathy for a Palestinian woman and her dead children, you can at least ask him, be a journalist then. Ask him, oh, where was your cousin living? What was it? Was it a residential area? Was it a civilian area? Which building? She has nothing to say. She doesn't want to talk about the Palestinian dead people. So this is what the Western media is doing. And these are just a few examples from the BBC. We'll talk about other examples later on. What the Western press is doing is, because they know that there's going to be a serious humanitarian crisis, that the footage and pictures we'll see coming out of Gaza will be very horrifying even for Western audiences. They're already creating this fog in which a Palestinian person is less human than an Israeli person. So anyways, we'll come back to this. But Benazir, I just wanted to ask you, what are the latest figures of fatalities?
So I thought we can maybe start off the video by giving a quick roundup of what's happened so far. Right now, as we speak, it's day 5 of the attack that started with Hamas attacking Israel, and now Israel for the past couple of days has been bombing Gaza, which is a small strip where 2.3 million people live. Right now, the death toll on the Israeli side is 1,200 people, and separately, 100 people, 100 Israelis, most of them are civilians, have been taken hostage, and according to media reports, taken into Gaza. But on the Gaza side, Around 900 Palestinians have been killed so far, and we can be sure that this number will rise because the bombing is going to continue, as the Israeli defense minister said, and they will most likely be launching a ground offense in the coming days. And of these 900 people, Natasha, 260 are children. 4,600 people have been wounded. We should not forget, as Israel cuts the electricity, the food supply, and the water supply that goes into Gaza, that 50% of the population of Gaza is under the age of 18. That means 50% of the population is children. So this policy is of starving children, of making sure they die of thirst and of hunger as they live in Gaza. Going forward, some of the stuff that's being discussed is what might happen and what the conflict would look like in the coming days, and what the attack that Israel has launched on Gaza will look like. One of the things that's been spoken about is a ground offense. I was reading an article on The Guardian where some of the experts and commentators were saying that Israel is very capable of launching a ground offense because it has the military capability. It has one of the most advanced militaries in the world, but there will be a huge human cost to Israel as well, because Hamas knows that territory really well. There are a lot of underground tunnels that exist in that territory, which Hamas will use. And more recently, Hamas has added drones to its ammunition. So that those drones will be used to track as the Israeli forces move in. So Israel is capable of launching a ground offense, but there is a very, very high human cost that it will have to suffer if it moves in. So let's see what that happens. And the other side, the hostages, the situation regarding the hostages, according to a report in the Haaretz, which is an Israeli publication, Qatar and Germany are conducting behind the door negotiations between the Israelis and Hamas. Hamas demands that if we do release the hostages, then we would need Palestinian prisoners who have been lying in Palestinian jails without trial for several years to be released. Israeli jails. So they to be released. So that is one of their demands. The negotiations are ongoing. We'll have to see what happens in the coming days. But I do want to talk a little bit also about the coverage that you spoke about. And I wouldn't even call it coverage. I would say blatant bias that we see in the Western media. There was a tweet that was tweeted on October 9th, which I think very accurately captures this bias that we have seen repeatedly in the Western media, which is your New York Times, which is your Associated Press, which is your BBC, which is also at times The Guardian. She writes, watching French news, my heart aches. I see beautiful lives in Israel. They had names, they had faces, they had mourning parents. Gaza, on the other hand, is missiles, deads, destroyed buildings, many but no names, no faces, or mourning parents. There are no beautiful lives in Israel. And I think that really is the crux of what we usually see when it comes to the Western media. Palestinians are mere numbers, they're statistics, they just die.
Yes.
Who kills them? We don't know, they just die. While Israelis and the Israeli families and the hostages that have been taken are getting extensive coverage of you know who they are, you know what their families are like, you know the tragedy that's unfolding in their family, you know what their dreams and aspirations were. There's extensive coverage of one side regarding the human tragedy, but there is barely any coverage or any sort of interest, I would say, of the children that are being killed in Palestine. Like I said, 50% of the population in Palestine, in Gaza, is under the age of 18. And we've continuously seen this. I want to read out one of the BBC, because you mentioned BBC. I want to read out one of their tweets. They tweeted regarding this conflict. More than 500 people have died in Gaza. More than 700 people have been killed in Israel. So this is a repeated narrative that we continue to see.
They died in Gaza because Gaza got COVID, or maybe there was dengue or malaria, something. They just died.
I just want to end this on because you were talking about how dehumanizing this is for Palestinians, where they're not really humans. And you know, this kind of feeds into the narrative that we're seeing from the Israeli side, where the Israeli defense minister says they're human animals and we're going to treat them like human animals. And the media is also treating them like maybe animals. because they're
Less
not really
than
giving
animals.
less than animals
If you
without really
remember,
giving them.
Dehumanizing them,
yes.
them.
So
Actually,
Yeah.
if you remember, before I come to Mehmal, sorry, Mehmal, you have to wait a little bit more. Before I come to Mehmal, when you're talking about animals, we did hear this story that Hamas had beheaded 40 Israeli babies. And this was horrifying news. And this was carried by almost all the major outlets out there. Some of them, even British ones in particular, put this up on their main page. And page one, this was page one news, and it was only this news. And there was no source cited except for one IDF major who said this somewhere. And then the Israeli army or a spokesperson told Anadolu, which is a Turkish agency, news agency, that they did not have any confirmation of this news. And so those people who had been carrying this news, who had been putting this up everywhere, what they did was, then one of those female journalists, what she did was that some of them deleted their tweets, some of them had to retract what they were saying, but the harm was done, the damage was done. One of those women is now tweeting pictures of the Israeli army in full combat gear holding dogs, and that's so touching. But I'm an animal lover, you both are animal lovers, we all have pets. You do not even talk about a dead Palestinian baby, but you will show how kind they are to a dog. And this is more than, they have less value than
Natasha,
animals.
it just reminds me, sorry, it just reminds me of a tweet. Somebody had tweeted that average Western reporter would say that, IDF major just told me Palestinians are savage cannibals who feast on human flesh as part of satanic rituals. He gave no evidence and the claim couldn't be verified, but I will immediately share it publicly with my tens of thousands of followers anyway. So this,
Yes.
I mean, this news
In
report
fact, if you remember,
regarding that news report, fake news.
If you remember, I think it was an Indian journalist who tweeted this story about some pregnant woman's stomach being cut, which actually happened in Gujarat, by the way, in India. And then Ben Shapiro retweeted it to his millions of followers. I do not understand why Indian journalists are so involved in this misinformation campaign. What do you have to lose? I have no idea of their connection to Palestine. Okay, yes, you're very friendly with Israel, but this has nothing to do with you. Why are you spreading disinformation?
Well, actually, there are many theories about that, but one of them actually is that the Modi government is emulating Israel in occupied Kashmir. What Israel is doing in Gaza to Palestinians, innocent Palestinians, is what India does to innocent Kashmiris in occupied Kashmir. And that is why we see the Indian media literally salivating at the thought of, Israel pounding Gaza with bombs and missiles and everything. And, a lot of people are questioning the Indian media's interest in Israel, and a lot of Indian media has gone to Israel to cover the war. But they're asking, why hasn't the same media, which is very pro-Modi media, not gone to Manipur to cover the ethnic violence that has been going on since May? So they are pointing out to the double standard, but basically it is because the Indian government is, of course, closely linked to Israel, but also they genuinely believe that, that's how Muslims should be dealt with. That's something that, a lot of even Indian commentators are pointing out.
I want to read out a statement that I think, because we're talking about how the Western media responds to this conflict again and again. The Palestinian ambassador to the United Nations, he said, and I think quite accurately, he said, history begins for some media outlets and politicians only when Israelis are killed. And here is a conflict which has been going on for so long, and Palestinians are killed almost every day. I mean, we forget that since 2007, Gaza has been under a blockade, an air, land, and sea blockade. Nothing can go in and out of that place without Israeli permission. And when you compare this kind of coverage to the kind of coverage that the Ukraine and the Russian conflict is getting, there is a very stark difference. There's a very clear definition of who the occupied is in the Ukraine and Russia conflict and who the occupier is. But when it comes to the Palestinian and the Israeli conflict, there is no distinction. Israel is always a victim, but is never a perpetrator. That is the narrative that's constantly being, told to audiences. For example, when a Ukrainian citizen goes and throws a Molotov cocktail on a Russian tank, that citizen is celebrated as being brave in the international media.
Resistance.
But a Palestinian throws a rock at an Israeli soldier or an Israeli tank, and that Palestinian is a terrorist. It's a militant. Even words like clashes erupted between Israelis and Palestinians, or there was tension between Israeli and Palestinian. That's such a false power imbalance that is not being portrayed to the reader, where you have a force that has a lot of military power and one of the most advanced militaries in the world. And on the other hand, you have the occupied, who are using stones and Molotov cocktails to fight back. So, and I think this is a big disservice to, I'm sorry I'm cutting you, Natasha, but this is a big disservice to journalism, because one of the primary responsibilities of the media and of a journalist is to tell the truth and to provide accurate information to your reader. But when you gloss over the information and you provide more coverage to one side, which is the aggressor and very obviously the aggressor, you are doing a huge disservice to your
And Benazir, you actually, you talked about the Israeli defense minister's language, but nobody in the Western media called him out for his genocidal language, where he's basically calling them that we are fighting against human, animals, and the siege or the complete siege of Gaza. So, nobody really talked about that. Nobody really called him out on that. And this reminds me of a Palestinian leader who was not affiliated with Hamas. In an interview with CNN said that, if we resist militarily, we are called terrorists. If we struggle non-violently, we're still called violent. If we resist with words, we're labeled as provocateurs. If foreigners support us, they're called anti-Semites. If Jews support Palestine, they're called self-hating Jews. So this is something that's also very, very interesting. And recently there was an op-ed piece published in Al Jazeera where the writer said that, get this straight, Western media, Palestinians aren't subhuman. And I'm just going to read a few lines from that op-ed because it was very nice. That at the core of this blindness is a shared doctrine that holds that a Palestinian is a disposable non-entity, an expendable byproduct of Israel's right to exist and to defend itself. In this perverse construct, Palestinian civilians are not considered innocent casualties of war, but remain largely responsible for their own deaths and desperate fates. The result, Western columnists will defend Israel without so much as a hint of doubt or equivocation, despite its demonstrable record of erasing Palestinians whenever it wants, wherever it wants, for whatever reason it wants.
I do want to just quickly add, before Natasha you speak, there are a few exceptions to this trend, and I think it's important to mention them. And one of them is Al Jazeera. I was just reading just before we sat down for this recording that the Ministry of Communication in Israel has decided, and they are deciding, to maybe ban Al Jazeera from coverage in the region, and for very obvious reasons. And another exception is, and I think that doesn't really get mentioned much, is Haaretz. It's an Israeli publication. It's a left-leaning publication. It's got a very, very complicated legacy, but I would say that I have not seen a publication anywhere in the world that has such scathing sort of criticism of their own government and its policies. It has called in an editorial that its government is committing Jewish terrorism. These are not my words. These are words that Haaretz has used in editorial. It has accused its government of genocide, of apartheidism. And one of its bigger names that continues to write for the publication is Gideon Levy, who recently wrote an article for the Haaretz. He wrote an op-ed, and he said, what is happening right now in Israel? Israel is to blame for it, and Israel's arrogance is to blame for it, because Israel has for very long considered that it can do whatever it wants to whoever it wants without being punished. And he says, when Israel says that we will punish Gaza like never before, he said Israel has been punishing Gaza. It has been punishing Gaza since 1948, when you have blocked the area, when you have held political prisoners, when you will not give them permits, you will not treat them like humans. This is what happens. So there are some critical voices that are rising from within Israel as well, who are critical of the government's policy.
And we must mention here that, more than 2 million people live in Gaza, and half of them are under the age of 18. So they are minors who've got nothing to do with the war, who've got nothing to do with anything.
In essence, what the Western media is doing is they are aiding, some Western media outlets are aiding the starvation, the embargo on 1 million children. Anyway, so before we wrap this up, I would just like to say there was this one story. I would like to give another example. There are many. LA Times had to retract their story about rape. We do know that. A lot of people were spreading more in disinformation. But anyways, there was this one story about this German Israeli girl. I think her name was Shani Luke, and she was at the music festival where Hamas attacked, and she was one of those people who were either taken hostage or maybe killed. And we've heard now that her mother has said that she's in a hospital. We do not have any confirmation really, but anyways. So a lot of people carried stories about Shani Lu, because she's a young teenage girl and she's very pretty and she's having a good time, and you know, she was either killed or really badly injured by Hamas. And then one of the footage that comes out from Gaza in the very second day is a very small baby. I think it's 6 months old, and they remove the body from the rubble. And we can show it to you, but it's very triggering. We'll try to show it to you. And all I noticed in that footage was that one of the baby's hands was clenched and the other was open. He was reaching out, maybe to mother. And I just thought, we don't even know whether this baby, that footage has been shared millions of times, okay? And we do not know whether the baby was a he or a she. We know a lot about every victim from Hamas side, but 2 days later, we don't know anything about this one baby. Nobody's following up with his parents or his relatives. What time did he die? She die? Was she the first child? Was a middle child? Was the last one? How many siblings did he have? This siblings survive? We know nothing because it didn't matter. It didn't matter because he or she, the baby just was Palestinian. So it does not matter. And one of the reasons that the Western media has to do is that because social media gets these stories now to Western audiences, where public opinion is very slowly, but very surely changing. And we know that surveys have shown that Democrats, especially young Democrats, have started questioning, well, is what Israel is doing is wrong? What is happening in Palestine? And they've started conflating the Free Palestine cause with a lot of other causes like Black Lives Matter and so on. So to counter that, this wave of disinformation is out there, or this wave of dehumanizing the Palestinians is out there. We thought we should address it in English, and we hoped you liked our show. Please do let us know what you think. Why is the Western media doing this? Let us know in the comments. Thank you for watching Aurat Card.